Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. I am so glad you're with us today on Life Support. What we do on this show is we tell stories to help you find a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ through suffering and trauma. And I know that's kind of an unusual thing to say, but we really believe that in those hard times of life, that's when Jesus makes himself known in tremendous ways. I know I've experienced that in my life through many ups and downs, traumas and tragedies, and I just really enjoy being here and meeting others who have their own stories to tell. Today's no exception. We have Tim and Diane McDaniel with us. They are in beautiful Georgia. Tim is a pastor at Eastside Baptist Church. He's a senior adult pastor there, where Diane also attends, and I want to thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you. Great to meet you, and your story, man, it rung so many bells with me, and some of the things that we navigate in church life and as pastors and all of these things, and just as people, trying to navigate through a sinful world. So let me start with you, Diane. And tell me a little bit about your story and your struggles with mental illness and how this kind of took shape in your life. And here you are in ministry together, and now you've got to deal with this challenge. Tell me about that.
Sure. I guess I'll start with, it was about 16 years ago. I got the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And things were happening in my life. I just had my third son, and my body just was breaking down, if you will. My brain was not able to process. My moods were out of whack. Things were just starting to shift all over the place. And I do have a history from childhood of trauma, and I have had bouts of depression, and I had suicide attempts in my youth. But this was 15 years later, past the suicide attempt that I had in high school, and I just couldn't function. And I'm looking at my husband, and I'm like, what do I do? Where do I go? And I went to the gynecologist, and he sent me to a psychiatrist right off the bat. And what takes 2 months to get in to see a psychiatrist, I got in 2 hours. I had an appointment because I just could not come to grips with, I don't want to live. I don't want to be here. And he's like, you need to be in the care of a professional. And so he sent me to a psychiatrist. And that day he looked at me and said, you have bipolar disorder. And I was not happy. I was not happy with that diagnosis.
I can imagine. And here's the interesting thing about church life, and especially when you're a pastor's wife. If you go to the doctor and he tells you, you've got cancer, or you've got something that's physical that you need to deal with, you've got friends you can go share it with, and everybody's sympathetic and everybody understands. And mental illness, kind of a different ballgame, isn't it?
Mental illness, yes, and it's because when you're in the church and you're diagnosed with mental illness, people don't understand it. They don't have an understanding of what mental illness is. They view it as it's sin in your life. They see it as you're lacking faith, and just all the things that come with being a Christian and being diagnosed with a mental illness. And I didn't have the support that people with mental illness need to have. Initially, I did not, because of the education and the way people look at mental illness in the church. I went and talked to the leader in the church, and he encouraged me not to go before the congregation and share that I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Yet on the very same day that I was diagnosed with bipolar, there was a member diagnosed with leukemia. And his wife went before the church that Sunday and shared, my husband has leukemia. And I learned from that experience that bipolar is a no casserole illness. People surrounded the family with leukemia. He had leukemia. They surrounded him with love and prayer, and he had casserole dishes, and they took care of their needs what they could as a church body. They were able to rally around them and support them. Tim and I and my family were alone to deal with the new diagnosis that I had been issued, yet I was not able to perform for my family the way I needed to.
Yeah, and to add a little bit to that, when we went to our pastor and shared that, he had his own experiences in his family with mental illness, and he had experienced, and this again 15 years ago, had experienced what his brother had gone through and how hard that was to navigate. And so he felt like it was for our protection to not really go forward in public with the diagnosis at that point, just out of her protection and
Or stigma.
Just with to have a stigma placed on her, all those things we talked about, and it's amazing how far we've come in 15 years.
Yeah, and at least people are able to open the door now and have that discussion. And Tim, let me just ask you a theological question. We're pastors, so we know everything, and people ask us all kinds of crazy questions, right? Theologically speaking, how do we look at mental illness? Because physical illness seems to sit really well, as Diane just described, and people know what to do, and they're, obviously we can pray through this, and God will enter in at some point. And why not the same for mental illness, do you think?
Well, I think it's, again, 15 years ago, it was my first experience with anyone that I really was close to that had a mental illness. And so I really wasn't, I didn't feel like there was a huge stigma from the people that I knew. I just knew that they had issues. Now, there's what Hollywood, had portrayed, of institutions and people who were severely disabled with mental illness. And so you have people who have that understanding. But theologically, I did not have great struggles. I knew that my wife was sick and it wasn't her fault. And I knew that there might be some issues of the trauma that she experienced in her childhood and youth, and that played a role in it. And so I knew God was sovereign, and I knew that this world is fallen, and that there was a reason that we were having to go through that, one that we didn't understand, and it was new, and it was scary, and it was very hard. And so I had some support, a little bit of support that some people knew, but we did not broadcast it outside of our very inner circle of friends. And so it was difficult in those early days.
Yeah, it can be very lonely, and that's excellent theology. And I think the word scary is why a lot of people pull away. And Diane, so you've been diagnosed with this brand new thing, and you heard the words bipolar, and now you're grappling with that, and you've been told to kind of lay low, and how did you begin to process that and move forward?
Well, for the first 3 years, I did lay low. I kept it quiet. I had a couple of hospital stays. I didn't let Tim tell anybody where I was. So I didn't have the support when somebody who is physically sick and goes into the hospital, and when they come home, they have some recovery time because of the help that the church members are reaching out and doing what they can to supplement for what's going on. So I ended up at the end of the 3-year mark, I was like, I'm just going to come out. I'm tired of living in secret. I'm tired of having to hold this by myself and carry this by myself. And I had reached a place and a confidence with the diagnosis that, okay, I have this. Whether people believe it's a legit illness, it's something that, that many of us struggle with. And whether they understand it or not, I have it. I know that I have it. And so I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to do for somebody else what I wanted done for me. So I wrote a book. I spent several years writing a book on my experience with bipolar disorder. I wanted somebody, when they're diagnosed, to be able to go to the internet and say, oh my goodness, there's somebody out there that has my similar story and could read, because I searched the internet for people I could connect with during that time. And there was nothing. There was nothing for me to connect with. And so I like the concept of your program of reaching others who are in similar situations and reaching out to be a support, to be what the church is called to be. And so I just came out and I decided I'm no longer going to be in secret about this. It's not, I didn't cause this. There's no shame in having bipolar disorder.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a difficult decision. What kind of reaction did you get?
Well, I made a video, and so I didn't get to see everybody's reaction. I made a video that chronicled my life, my journey with bipolar, and people were okay. People would come out and say, I have a nephew, or my Aunt Susie, or they would just start sharing their personal stories with it. And it just made me feel less alone, and it encouraged them at the same time, because I wasn't the only one out there.
So let's talk about the marriage perspective of this. Here you are, you've got children, you're married, you're in ministry, you've got all these other pressures on you. How did this affect your marriage?
Well, I mean, we kind of went into crisis mode to a degree, where when she began exhibiting these symptoms and got the diagnosis, it was hard for her to function on days. And fortunately, I have family here in town, so there were times where the boys would go over to Grandmama and Papa's and stay there, and times where I might have to stay home and work from home just to be there with her and to take care of her. And so it was kind of survival mode. And we had been married for 11 years when she got the diagnosis, and we had, an 18-month-old and a 6 and 7-year-old, 3 boys at home that had, the older 2 were playing baseball and had stuff going on. And I wanted to make their lives as normal as possible and to keep them going. And so it was juggling, and it was not easy, but I knew I had to be there for her, support her, and have empathy and concern. And whenever she couldn't do whatever, I just had to figure out what we needed to do to keep things going.
Mm-hmm. And Diane, did you feel like a burden at that point?
Absolutely. I felt like such a burden. I didn't want to be the cause of holding my boys back from doing any of their activities. I didn't want to be the cause. So I did do a lot of retreating, and I would go to my room and I didn't want to be alone. That was the last thing I needed, was to be alone, but I didn't want to be responsible for my family not being able to participate in their sports and their activities that they had going on. So I did retreat, and I used a lot of that time, and I would write and I would journal. But we also know just a typical marriage is hard. So take a typical marriage and the challenges that are before a typical marriage, and place mental illness into the mix, and it creates an even bigger challenge and we didn't know. I knew a little bit about mental illness because I have a master's in psychology. So I knew enough to know that I did not want bipolar disorder to be my illness. And Tim was not educated on the illness and things that I could challenge future spouses to do. When somebody is diagnosed with something in the family, do your very best to educate yourself as much as possible about whatever illness you are faced with, because the education takes away some of that fear and that unknown and that anxiety. So I'm a big proponent on educating yourself.
And one thing I'll add is that as you look back and how God put us together, we're very, our personality, she's very outgoing and life of the party, and I'm a little bit more reserved and laid back, easygoing. But I think God put that in me to be able to handle the ups and downs of her emotional stability, and I was able to bring a little bit more calm and, not reacting to the ups and downs, but just riding those waves with her and being there. And I think with the way God made me, I've always said He made me to be her wife so I could handle, or my husband to be able to handle the ups and downs of what we were facing.
Yeah, that's a good gift. We're talking with Tim and Diane McDaniel. They're talking about Diane's diagnosis of bipolar and life in ministry after that. Diane, so you mentioned that you would retreat some, you'd go right, you would be alone. How did God enter in to those times when you were kind of thinking through this and grappling with it, and here you are, a Christian, and you have all these belief systems that God's in control, and we all believe that, and we know He loves us, but bipolar God, really? I mean, how did He touch you at that time?
Well, I'm just going to be honest. There were times that the grappling was so intense, it nearly cost me my life. So I did try to take my life. Throughout my lifetime, there's been 3 different real episodes of suicide. And so I did go forward. My 2 years ago was my biggest attempt ever. I went ahead and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't take it. I'm like, God, you are sovereign. You are Lord over all. Let me help you out. Let me give you the next step. And I'm going to help you out here, God. And so I learned a huge lesson in that. When I woke up after my attempt, and I'm in the emergency room, surrounded by medical equipment and surrounded by just hospital stuff. And I'm looking around and I'm like, I can't do it. I can't even do it. I can't take my own life. And that's when it was just like the sovereignty of God became so real. It's like, you are sovereign. And even in the midst of my most intense pain, my most intense moment of not wanting to be here, you were like, Diane, you are my child, and I will bring you home when I'm ready to bring you home. You are not in charge. And so it's just His sovereignty is what has spoke to me throughout my journey.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because 2 years ago is not a very long time. And it's still very fresh, and I appreciate you sharing that. And those are things that we normally, at least I can speak for myself. There'll be days when I'll be struggling with depression, and then I walk into church, and how you doing? I'm great. How are you? Yeah, good to see you. And there's some wisdom in that, because you don't want to just dump on everybody. You can't carry this around for everyone. But I find it very difficult to be transparent and honest. And I think it's a lot my issue, but I think it's also the issue of the culture of church. So how do you talk to people about this when you run into them and they ask you, how are you progressing? How are you doing?
I am at a new place in my journey, and it's a place of just I don't have the suicidal ideations on the level that I had before my last suicide attempt. I still have the mood fluctuations. I still have moments where I want to go off the meds and just see, maybe if I get off of this, I can have more energy, or maybe I can, and I want to try that, and I react and I don't, and I have the mood episodes. But for the suicide attempt, I don't have that longing to not be here anymore. I don't have that longing. I just want to be with Jesus. I see it now as, okay, Diane, you are on this journey. You have written a book, and now you are offering hope, the hope of Jesus to other people through your illness. And I can't explain it to you other than I don't think about death and dying all the time the way I did pre-suicide attempt. It's like God has just shown me his sovereignty, and there's hope. There's just hope outside. If he can do that for me, I never wanted to be here, and I just begged and pleaded, but his sovereignty was just, when I woke up and I'm like, I'm still here, and okay, Lord, use me. Do what you can with my story to bring others to you.
And that's a sign of healing, for sure, that God's doing in your heart and your mind and how you see things. Tell me about the book. Is that available for the public to read?
Definitely, yes. It's titled Journals from a Broken Mind, and it just came out in November, and I have a website titled journalsfromabrokenmind.com, and you can go into the book section of the website and you can purchase the book if you want. It just journals my story from birth to basically my suicide attempt, post-suicide attempt. So it has all my struggles, my hospital stays, and the experiences in the hospitals, which are not pleasant.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to help a lot of people. And so we want to have you back. And here's a question I'm going to ask you next time. So I'm now teasing this, and I'm warning you, okay, about this question. God is a God of love. God says he loves us. Then how could he cause, or whatever kind of word you want to use there, this kind of hardship on one of his children? That's what I want to talk about, because I think this is some of the block that we get when we try to talk about this in church, and why people kind of want to stay away from it, because it doesn't always logically line up. But I appreciate you both being here this time, and I wish you both the best. You're having a great time in Georgia these days. We were talking sports a little bit. Everybody's winning everything down there, and congratulations. But more than that, thanks so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Paul.